So next up we have Rachel Jiang, who's a senior economist with Bloomberg New Energy Finance.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining today, and thanks for the introduction. So again, my name is Rachel, and I'm a senior analyst at Bloomberg New Energy Finance, or BNEF for short. And today I'm just going to go over some of the trends in the renewable energy and other clean tech technologies that BNEF has seen that's perhaps relevant for our mining audience. So today I'm going to try to address three key points. One is surrounding the outlook for solar and wind and battery storage technologies in the power sector of the future out to 2040. So of course, forecasting is a tricky exercise, so I'm just going to say BNEF has tried its best. And our view is that solar and wind alone will make up about a third of global electricity generation by 2040, and more of this generation will come from distributed sources compared to now. I'll also talk about how these changes in deployment comes upon the back of falling costs for wind, solar, and battery technologies, and how those cost outlooks affect the competitiveness of these technologies compared to the more traditional fossil fuel generation. So let's start with deployment. So BNEF every year puts together something called the New Energy Outlook, or NEO for short. And this year, our 2017 global modeling produced, I think this is a summary graph. As you can see here, we're graphing the generation mix for the global energy or power sector going out to 2040. And we're expecting load, so global electricity demand, to grow about 60% during this period. The electricity sources going to meet this load, though, will change significantly between now and about 20 years from now. So currently, wind and solar meet about 5% of global electricity demand, and we expect that, again, by 2040, this will go up to about a third globally. If we lump in large hydro generation into that, then clean energy, in the sense of like zero-emission renewable energy, will meet about half of global electricity demand, so that's the pink line there. And that growth in generation from clean sources comes upon the back of changes in the installed base of generation capacity during this time. So wind and solar currently compose about 12% of the plant stack globally, and we expect that to go up to about half by 2040. And as you can see there from the light yellow portion, which is small scale or behind the meter PV, we do expect distributed resources to start making up a growing portion of that pie. What is slightly harder to see here is the utility scale and small scale battery sections, which is the bottom part of the pink line on top. And as you can see, we do expect some growth in batteries, but much smaller than what we see in some of the other renewable technologies. And a large part of that is due to the higher cost of battery storage at the moment. We expect storage to hit about 400 gigawatts by 2040, however, which is still a significant amount, and most of that to come from small scale or behind the meter sources. So, of course, a lot of this comes on the back of cost trends that we're seeing, which influences the deployment for both on-grid and off-grid uses. And just a quick note, the graphs that I presented before were global, but the trends in wind and solar deployment, or rather their growth, we do expect to hold across major countries. And amongst countries that's important for the mining sector, Chile and Australia top the list about 50% by 2040. There are very strong solar resources there. Another major change that we expect to see during that time frame is the growth in decentralized energy resources. So this graph looks at, again, a few major countries and plots the sum of their behind-the-meter solar and storage and demand response capacity divided by the total installed capacity in the country. And as you can see here, we see a variety of trends in terms of decentralization across different countries globally. We're expecting about 14% of the stack to be met by behind-the-meter generation by 2040, but Australia is expected to really take the cake there. They're already a leader with about 10%. We expect it to go up to about 45%. So that said, I think the main points from this section are, cleaner technology for power generation is coming and more decentralized. So let's take a look at the price trends that are expected to drive that. So I think this is a story that's probably familiar to most people here, which is that solar technology is getting cheaper faster. Looking at just data from 1976 to the end of 2016, we've seen about a 28% learning rate for solar PV modules, and we do expect solar modules to continue decreasing in price quite quickly. Onshore wind has shown a learning rate of about 19%, so slower but still quite significant. And a lot of that has come upon the back of turbine cost decreases, so changes in equipment pricing. So this here is just a global index collected by BNEF, and you can see that back in 2009, wind turbines were pricing about $2 million per megawatt. This is all in USD, by the way, and now it's just under 1 million. In addition to that, there have been changes to the height of wind turbines and also like rotor diameter and other things that improve the productivity and therefore the cost per megawatt hour for these technologies, leading to some like world record unsubsidized clean energy prices in the past year. So lithium-ion batteries is another area where there have been significant drops in cost. At the end of 2016, our survey indicated a median price of about $273 per kilowatt hour for lithium-ion battery packs, so not the full installed cost, just the pack cost. And according to our forecast, just extending the learning rate there, by 2030, the pack price will hit about $73 per kilowatt hour in real 2017 dollars. Now, the actual cost of a fully installed system can vary widely depending upon location, the application, et cetera. But the general story, of course, is one of cost decline. And I'll just touch quickly also upon this chart. So as we know, batteries are made from a variety of metals, and BNEF has also taken a look at how this greater deployment of lithium-ion batteries will impact metals demand. I'm just showing one example here for the cobalt market, supply and demand, and as lithium-ion batteries are deployed, primarily driven by growing EV and e-bus demand, we're expecting to see like shortages show up in the early part of next decade. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So now that we've talked a little bit about the cost declines for renewable technologies, how does that actually compare against traditional fossil technologies, and how competitive are renewables at the current moment? So I think I'll start that part of the discussion by kind of stating the obvious, which is that for grid-connected mines, a fall in fuel prices will boost the opportunity cost for a operator to deploy either off-grid or contract for on-grid renewable resources. So here, just giving an example from Western Pennsylvania, actually. The blue line here shows the natural gas price in that part of the US, which is the home of the US shale gas boom. And as you can see, the blue line has come down quite a bit in recent years. And alongside that, the on-peak power price, which is the green area, has come down significantly as well. And as the cost of wholesale buying power from the electric grid falls, then contracting separately for renewable energy or building your own facility then becomes a higher opportunity cost proposition. So in terms of, sorry, those are just examples showing how that affects the pricing. But in terms of off-grid mining sites, renewable costs, of course, are typically higher. Remote sites require higher shipping and labor costs, and these variables generally experience fewer or slower cost reductions. In high-income countries, our rule of thumb is that off-grid solar remote places may cost about 50% more in capex than in more urban locations. But in very remote areas, the solar PV is also, of course, generally competing with diesel, which are higher cost than the grid resources. And this chart is not directly related to mining, but I'd like to just use it as an analogy. We haven't published our numbers on how hybridization of diesel assets with solar and batteries impact mining off-takers in particular, but we recently did look at power supply for off-grid telecom towers. And obviously not the same industry, but off-grid telecom is also one that requires very stable and high-quality electricity. They have a 99.9% runtime and generally always also require like backup generation. And here, if we just look at the columns for India on the right-hand side, we can see that for a diesel generator, we expect the cost of such a system to be about 76 US cents per kilowatt hour. And adding a battery to that brings the cost of the system down to about cents per kilowatt hour. And adding a solar system to that in addition brings it down to about 40 cents. So quite a potential significant improvement from hybridization, at least in this particular application. I'd also just like to tie this discussion to our outlook on gas and coal prices because that influences how our team came up with the modeling you saw earlier about the growth in renewables, how competitive they are versus coal and gas resources. So here on the left, we have our coal price outlook, fairly flat going forward, whereas for natural gas, there's more of an uptick, especially in the US, where we expect prices to go up from about $3 US dollars per MMBTU now to about 5 in 2040. And these feed, of course, like fuel costs feed into the marginal cost of generation from coal and gas technologies. And in terms of looking at how renewables compete with fossil generation, BNEF likes to talk about it in terms of 2 tipping points. So the first point is when new renewable builds, so building a new solar or wind plant, is cheaper than building a new fossil fuel plant. At that point, if there is a need to fill growing demand on a grid or to replace some lost generation, the grid operator or utility will say, we're going to build a renewable resource just from a cost perspective. The second tipping point is when a new renewable resource can actually beat out the marginal cost of generation for an existing coal or gas resource, and that's a bit harder to do. So for the first tipping point, we expect that in most of the major countries we model, wind and solar will be able to, like new build, will be able to beat out new build for gas or coal on a cost basis by about 2025 at the latest. But in terms of competing with the existing coal and gas, that's a more complicated story. Let's look first at Canada and the US. So here we've plotted for utility scale PV and onshore wind, the levelized cost of energy or LCOE for these new build technologies. And LCOE is just the total expected fixed and variable cost for a project divided by the total expected megawatt hours of generation produced by that project over its lifetime. And we're comparing that against the marginal cost of generation, so like variable cost, fuel cost, et cetera, for gas and coal. So you can see that for both of these, we do expect like utility scale solar to overtake existing coal and gas by about 2030. These are unsubsidized prices. So in the US, actually, while new solar undercuts existing gas by 2027 and coal shortly afterwards, wind actually doesn't quite catch up. But given that this is an unsubsidized picture, and in the US currently there is tax credits support, we have seen PPAs for quite low prices, as low as $20 per megawatt hour. In Chile and Australia, though, the picture is slightly different. Both of these countries have great solar resources, but also great coal resources. And in both cases, we do see that it'll take longer for solar or even wind to try to catch up with existing coal. However, we do still expect a lot of solar and wind deployment, especially solar deployment in these countries, despite the cheapness of existing coal assets. Part of it is because load is expected to grow in these countries, and even though new renewables may not yet be able to compete with existing coal, they can compete with new build gas or coal. So the system is supposed to still add these renewable resources when there is an opportunity to add resources and meet new demand. Additionally, in Australia, we do think that the cost of these new solar facilities will be able to beat refurbishing coal units by about 2023. So there is still a lot of opportunity for new renewable build there. And I think just to wrap up, I think mostly I've been talking about a story of falling costs for renewables, and we have seen just globally a lot of corporations starting to sign PPAs for renewable energy. This year so far globally, we've seen almost 3 gigawatts signed in terms of PPAs. Of course, part of this is some corporations wishing to appear more green, but part of it is because they're taking advantage of the falling cost of these technologies and also using power purchase agreements as a hedge against swings in wholesale power prices. So a variety of reasons, but it is a trend that we've seen taking off globally. And those are my slides. Happy to take any questions afterwards. Yeah.